I was recently invited to host a workshop on the topic of forgiveness. The act of forgiving is, I think, a special kind of act because, unlike, for instance, the act of deception or the act of lying, which was the topic of the previous workshop, and can um, which can contain some moral dimension, the act of forgiving, to me, is entirely contained in the moral sphere. By that I mean that when I forgive, there is no material exchange, there is no information exchange, there's not even a legal value, I would say, to that act. Its function is entirely moral. And this makes the act of forgiving very pure. It makes it an interesting topic to explore, and it explains why we might be tempted to base an entire system of morals on that pure act alone. I took as a starting point this quote from the French philosopher Derrida, where he reflects on the conditions of what makes forgiveness possible, or rather, what makes it impossible. Because he says that if you are confronted with an act which is easily forgiven, which is forgivable, then we need not speak, we hardly need to speak of forgiveness. There is no moral value there. There is no moral effort being made. If, for instance, you forget to hold the door for me when I'm coming up behind you, you might say sorry, but I've already forgiven you. There was really nothing there to forgive. The act, the supposed fault, forgive itself. But then, if what is forgivable does not uh, deserve this title of does not deserve the actual act of forgiveness, then that leaves us with what is unforgivable. What is unforgivable then is what really requires us, what really requires our forgiveness. But what is unforgivable is by definition impossible to forgive. And so, in that way, forgiveness is impossible. You would need some kind of miracle, Derrida says. And he's being provocative here, um, but it allows me to draw this, which I might call the horizontal axis of forgiveness, where you have that upper limit there, that ceiling above which we have acts that I consider impossible to forgive. And then you also have that bottom limit, that ceiling beneath which are acts that are so easy to forgive that they require no effort from me. Now, Derrida seemed to be saying that there is no space between those limits. I disagree. I think it is quite plausible to think of acts that do require some moral effort uh, to forgive, but are neither so hard to forgive that I would call them unforgivable, but are neither so easy to forgive that they do not actually require any effort from me. What is interesting here is that, given that framework, if I refuse to forgive an act, if I say that this act is unforgivable, in a way, it looks like I am speaking about the act, but really also I am, more importantly, maybe saying something about my own moral ability, my own moral capacity. I'm saying, in a way, I do not have the moral strength to forgive this. And this is maybe where it gets more controversial. I would want to say that the more you are, the more effort you're willing to make, the more you are ready to forgive, the more morally laudable you are. I say this might be controversial because we might normally want to say that there are acts that are so horrible that forgiving them would in itself be a moral fault, a sin. I do not want to say that. I would want to say that there's no limit to the ideal of charity here, even though there are very obviously limits to my own capacity to forgive. Of course, this logic also would apply then to the ceiling. If for you the bottom limit of this horizontal axis of forgiveness is very low, if for instance I forget to hold the door for you and this has made you angry and it requires of you a real effort to forgive, well, this, yes, creates an opportunity for a proper act of forgiveness, but it also means that for you this axis is, this space is much lower on the axis. And this is, I would say, a sign of moral immaturity. This comes with a warning, and this is where I introduce what I would call the horizontal axis of forgiveness. Because, and I'm still with Derrida here in a way, because that's the first thing he says. He says, forgiveness is not oblivion. Forgiving is not forgetting. I think that we can agree that if it appears easy for me to forgive, but it is not out of charity, but out of carelessness that I forgive an act, or I seem to have gotten over an act because, in fact, I've not paid any attention to the act. I have not perceived any moral uh, issue here. Uh, I have not. I do not find any moral weight there. Then also we should not speak of forgiveness. Then there must become some kind of moral appreciation for there to for forgiveness to be possible. On the other hand, I would need to admit that if I still feel resentful, angry, or sad or hurt, then I have not actually forgiven, or I have not yet forgiven. And this again might be slightly controversial because I found when speaking with others, and this is quite plausible, that we might want to say, well, on an emotional or on a psychological level, I might still feel hurt or sad or angry, while on a more intellectual or a more moral level, I have already accomplished the act of forgiving. I don't like this division. To me, really, if there is still resentment, then the forgiveness has not taken place. I might have the intention of forgiving. I might even have said that I have forgiven. Um, but then that would be only an appearance. And so between, again, like earlier, between those two limits, we would have what we can probably what we can properly consider an act of forgiveness. But from this, and this is the last thing I want to say, from this consideration about resentment, I uh, I would like to say that forgiveness is a good example, maybe the prime example or the prime illustration of what is called, of what I think is called immanent justice. Immanent justice being the idea that being good brings its own reward and that being bad brings its own punishment, and that there is not therefore any need for some kind of external reward for goodness, or any kind of external punishment for being bad. That, in other words, the good is its own justification. That's an old debate. That's an old debate. But if forgiveness is considered to be a good act, and that in forgiving, I also free myself from a kind of burden, um, whereby I'm no longer tied to the act, to the wrongful act that must be forgiven. through resentment or sadness or hurt, um, well, then there is a reward to forgiving, and there is a punishment in not forgiving, because in refusing or in being unable or unwilling to forgive, then I remain tied to that act through resentment or hurt or sadness. This comes with a warning, however, because if I then forgive for my own sake, if uh, my intention in forgiving is to free myself, then I would say we are not dealing with true forgiveness anymore. It is not an act of charity anymore. And this is the same warning that comes with the concept of imminent justice generally. If in being good, I seek an ulterior reward, if in order to be good, I require a kind of justification whereby I further my own interest, then we are not truly speaking of the good anymore. Thank you.